Well, let's get started. So my name's Sam Kaufman, and I'll be one of the moderators along with Amber Lincoln. This is session 5, the Shared Beringia Heritage session. I guess just to preface here, due to recent changes in the National Park Service policy guidance, this session could no longer be facilitated by the Park Service, which is why myself and Amber are being the moderators. But we're excited that this is still happening. This is a really awesome session and one that is absolutely applicable to our association. So welcome, and Evguenia, if you had anything you'd like to say. Or...
I just want to thank you guys for doing it, and yeah, let's get started.
Okay.
Maybe the quick technical remark is I talked to Natalia and Alexander, who are our second and third speakers yesterday, and as of yesterday, they were going to participate. I don't see them in the room right now, but
he just
Natalia
joined.
Tatarenkova. Okay, great. So yep. Hopefully everything works out. Thanks.
Okay.
It's 6 o'clock their time.
Oh, okay. Well, I will hand it over to Victor and Alexei to present their paper, Recent Survey of Ancient Eskimo Dwellings on the Medvezhyi Island Archipelago in the Eastern Siberian Arctic. I apologize for screwing that up, but
yes. Good day, dear colleagues. Now I am start the demonstration.
At the bottom of your screen, you should have a share screen.
Oh.
There it is. Perfect. Yep.
Yes. Dear colleagues, thank you very much for the invitation to take part in the Alaska Anthropological Association's session, Beringia Shared Heritage. Our presentation today will be about the recent survey of ancient Eskimo dwellings on the Medvezhyi Islands archipelago in the Eastern Siberian Arctic. Medvezhyi Islands is a hard-to-reach Arctic archipelago located about 100 kilometers north of the mouth of the Kalama River in the East Siberian Sea in the northeast of Russia. On this slide, you can see this archipelago, which in the Pleistocene was part of the land in West Beringia. Medvezhyi Islands archipelago includes 6 islands: Krystovsky, Pushkareva, Andreeva, Leontieva, Lysova, and Четырехстолбовой. The closest to the mainland and the largest of them is Krystovsky Island. It is located about 50 kilometers from land. Its highest point, Mount Shapka, is 273 meters high. In clear weather, this island is clearly visible from the coast. The most remote island is Четырехстолбовой. Due to the severity of natural and climatic conditions, there are still no permanent human settlements here. However, it is known that people have been exploring these remote places for thousands of years. Medvezhyi Islands were first described by Russian Cossack explorer Mikhail Stadukhin. In 1647, he reported to authorities in Yakutsk that there was an island in the sea on the way to Kolyma River. On the left hand, where Chukchi go for winter walrus hunt, and it takes them one day to travel there. Traces of human presence of the islands, such as ancient semi-subterranean houses and utensils, were discovered by numerous individuals, including hunter Ivan Velegin, son of Boyar Fedot Amosov, survivors Stepan Andreev, Ivan Leontiev, Ivan Lysov, and Alexei Pushkarev, Lieutenant Baron Ferdinand Wrangel, and Norwegian polar explorer Harald Ulrich Sverdrup. Sverdrup and the Captain Oscar Wisting spent the winter in 1925 near Четырехстолбовой Island, here on board of the Royal Amundsen's expedition ship Mood. Permanent Soviet polar station operated on Четырехстолбовой Island from 1933 to 1995. The employees of this polar station, Sirchin and Andreev, excavated some of the island's dwellings in 1948, 1949, and 1953, respectively. The excavated bone, antler, wood, and metal artifacts were delivered to regional archaeologists who identified them as Bernik, Panek, and Thule material culture of Arctic sea hunters, dating to the end of first, middle of second millennium AD, placing these finds into the cultural continuum spreading from the mouth of Kolyma River all the way to Greenland. These collections were published by Nina Beregovaya in the Soviet Archaeology Journal in 1954 and Vera Rauschenbach in the brochure New Finds of the Четырехстолбовой Island in 1969. In 1995, the Prelensky Archaeological Expedition of Academy of Sciences of Republic of Sakha-Yakutia, led by Yuri Machanov, carried out exploration work on Четырехстолбовой Island, which discovered material culture dating back to the Stone Age. On the slide, on the right, you can see a stone tool, a fragment of a diamond-shaped spear tip. The expedition also discovered several ancient Eskimo dwellings and carried out small excavation of some of them. These materials are now curated in the Museum of Arctic Archaeology, named by Svetlana Fedoseyeva of the Arctic Research Center of Republic of Sakha-Yakutia, and have not yet been published, although these sites were added to the map of the archaeological sites of Northeast Asia surveyed by the Prelensky Archaeological Expedition. You can see this map on the slide on the left. St. Petersburg archaeologist Vladimir Petulko found similar items along with other tools and mammoth fauna in the north of the Yana-Indigirskaya lowland and at the Lake Nikita and Berylok sites. Numerous radiocarbon dates show that these sites existed at the very end of the Neopleistocene during the last glacial maximum, about 13,000, 11,000 years ago. On the slide at the bottom right, you can see the arrowhead from Четырехстолбовой and similar artifact from the Yano and Digirka sites on the other slides. Such stone points, according to Vladimir Pitulko, have an analogy in the northern North America, where such items are known as Chindadan points, which makes it possible to directly correlate the cultures of the Upper Paleolithic of Asia and America. In particular, these are the sites of the Denali culture in Alaska. The first integrated biological and archaeological expedition to the territory of Medvezhyi Islands took place in 2021. Here you can see a map of the Nizhny district with Medvezhyi Islands archipelago. The expedition was organized by the staff of the Institute of Biological Problems of Permafrost of Yakut Scientific Center, the Institute of Archaeology and Ethnography of Zbraz, the Arctic Research Center of Republic of Sakha-Yakutia, the Lena Pilas National Park, and the Medvezhyi Islands State Natural Reserve. The objectives were to monitor and assess the current state of the natural environment and to inventory archaeological sites of Medvezhyi Islands archipelago. The expedition started in town of Chersky, from where we went to boat along the Kolyma and Chukachia rivers to the coast of the Siberian Sea. From the coast, we crossed to Четырехстолбовой Island, leaving a group of people of Krystovsky Island. Here you see the member of the expedition in the river port of the town of Chersky before the departure. This slide shows a schematic map of Четырехстолбовой Island, the outline of which resembles a whale or a fish. The red circles indicate the ancient Eskimo dwellings discovered there. This slide shows the island was named the Четырехстолбовой, in English, four pillar, by sailors of the expedition of Ferdinand Wrangel in 1820, after four granite pillars, or as local people call them, kekurs or kihilach in Yakut. The slide shows a drone photograph of the remains of the Soviet polar station on Четырехстолбовой Island. Our expedition was based in one of the buildings of the station suitable to habitation. Our goal was to cover the entire perimeter of the islands and document the existing archaeological sites. The first three dwellings were found in the northeastern part of the island. The dwellings are semi-subterranean with a driftwood floor and sod roof. All three dwellings were to the various degree disturbed by previous excavations. This slide shows a general view of the first dwelling, as well as traces of excavations carried out in 1995 by the expedition of Yuri Machanov. This slide shows views of the second dwelling and traces of excavations at Sirchin, as well as a stratigraphic trench excavated in 1995 by the expedition of Yuri Machanov. You can see the dwelling's wooden walls, and in Photo D, there are many faunal finds and archaeological artifacts in situ of the surface. The finds include polished lancet knives and abrasives. All of them are made of slate. Wooden objects are fragmented. We found 11 pottery fragments. The body is porous with the addition of gravel, crushed quartzite, and fur. Medium grain sand can be traced in only 2 ceramic fragments. 2 fragments have a clearly visible technical code ornament. Another find is a horn handled by metal blade. You can see it on the left side of the slide. On the right are similar tools from Andreev's excavation published by Vera Rauschenbach. In addition, we found 6 trimmings of seal and polar bear skin and 20 animal bones. And the lower mandibles of reindeer, dog, and Arctic fox. On the slide, you can see the fragments of lower mandibles of dog and Arctic fox. This slide shows a general view of dwelling number 3 and traces of excavations by Yuri Machanov's expedition in form of stratigraphic trench light over the dwelling, and these dwellings entrance are oriented to the west towards the sea. The remains of dwelling number 4 are located in the northern bay, in the central part of the island, near the mouth of a small stream. Here is a general view of the dwelling. The upper half of dwelling was exposed by earthworks. Wooden structures come to the surface. 2 living chambers with approximate dimensions of 2 times 1.5 meters and clearly visible. The wooden walls of the dwelling are inclined inward. The inner walls are made up of two layers of logs laid on top of each other. The entrance traces north towards the seashore. Some artifacts are visible in permafrost layers of previously excavated pits. Here you can see a large stone whale knife. Here is its general view. In addition, 2 fragments of pottery were discovered on surface. You can see one of them on the slide. We also found a horn spatula. Wooden objects are represented by 46 items. For example, this is a wooden scraper handle. We found fire drills, some of which were toy kayaks. Similar items found in a settlement near Cape Baranov were published by Alexei Kladnikov and Nina Beregovaya and interpreted as children's toy kayaks. This is a tool for cleaning clothes from snow. There are also several wooden objects of unclear purpose, including possible arrow and spear shaft. All wooden objects came from the previous excavation and were peeled up on the surface of the dwelling. On a narrow isthmus connecting Cape Gribok with the main part of the island, there are 2 dwellings, number 4 and number 6. This slide shows a general view of dwelling number 5, as well as traces of previous excavation on it in the form of pits. These are the excavation of Yuri Machanov's expedition. 5 fragments of ceramics were found in the dwelling number 5, of which 3 fragments have a clearly visible technical court ornament. In addition, we found 8 bone fragments, half of lower dog mandible and leather ring sewn with a coarse thread and 3 pieces of skin with hair. This slide shows a fragment of the lower dog mandible. Here you can see a general view of dwelling number 6 from the west. Dwellings number 7, 8, 9 are positioned in a group located in the southwestern part of the island. The entrance of all dwellings faces south towards the sea. Here is a general view of dwelling number 7 taken from a drone. And here is a photo taken from the sea. It shows a clearing in front of the dwelling and the dwelling itself. In dwelling number 7, we found 48 ceramic fragments. This is one of them. This is a piece of ceramics with technical ornamentation. 11 such fragments were found. And this is a fragment of ceramics with a large mineral impurity. Stone artifacts are represented by a pebble scraper, 3 fragments of polished flint sheath knives, and 2 fragments of stone tools. The site assembly included a large collection of faunal remains, such as bones of marine mammals, dogs, Arctic foxes. The slide shows a fragment of the lower mandibles of Arctic foxes. This slide shows a general view of dwelling number 8 from the slide and top taken from a drone. A stratigraphic trench is visible laid over the dwelling. These are traces of the excavations of Yuri Machanov's expedition in 1995. There is also a photo of the stone adze lying on the surface of the dwelling. Here is a stone adze. Stone items are also represented by a fragment of woman's knife ulu made of flint shale. In the area near the dwelling, a wooden elongated object like an arrow shaft was also found, as well as a soft wooden ladle with remains of a patch on a crack. Dwelling number 9 is the largest and untouched by excavation. On this slide, you can see photos of the general view taken from a drone and a fragment of ceramics visible from a crack in the earth embankment. A fragment of stone adze was also found here. Additionally, we found a small flint flake with 10 fragments of bones, a silk claw, and half a pole fox mandible. Our work on Medvezhyi Islands, as well as the previous research, showed that the islands of the Archipelago may contain traces of settlements of ancient Eskimo cultures, as well as traces of early people of the Stone Age. On Chotorostobovoi Islands, we documented 9 dwellings of the ancient Eskimo cultures of the semi-subterranean type, with a variety of archaeological materials as well as faunal remains. Some dwellings are completely untouched by excavation and represented a kind of the archive, a unique of storehouse of information on human exploration of high Arctic sealed in permafrost. In terms of our Design features. The dwellings found on Chotorostolbovo Island in general have the closest analogies in the ancient Eskimo cultures of Donetsk, Panak, and Tule, dating to the end of middle of second millennium BC, although their full reconstructions will be possible only after full-scale archaeological excavation, which will require time and material cost. This is a challenge ahead of us in the future. The main problem in the inaccessibility of the islands, difference and logistic, harsh, natural and climatic conditions, and short field session when excavation can be carried out. This time in 1991, it shows already on August 16, and the sea began to fill with drifting ice, which made it necessary to hostility leave the islands. In conclusion, Medvezhyi Island is one of the known of professional circles, but practically unexplored archaeological locations in the East Siberian Arctic. Comprehensive studies of the archaeological sites of these remote lands will help to trace the relationship between anthropogenic activity and ecosystems of the islands under the changing natural conditions of the Neopleistocene and Holocene. This is our acknowledgements to all participants of the complex expedition. Thank you for attention. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Victor and Alexei. Wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
Are we supposed to raise our hands for the questions, so just step in?
Either chat, you can use the chat, or you can raise your hand and unmute and just chit chat that way, whichever you prefer.
I set myself in Russian language in the chat, so I don't know how to undo it.
Okay.
Would it be okay if I ask my question right away? Since
Sure.
Виктор, у меня есть вопросы, наверное, он будет не только моим вопросом. Я сначала его задам по-русски, а потом переведу, хорошо? То есть мой вопрос, были ли проведены какие-то методы точных датировок на тех материалах, которые вы обнаружили? Одну секундочку, я переведу. So I had a quick question for Victor, which I think is probably not just my question. The question is if there was any dating done on the site materials, including radiocarbon dating.
Да, спасибо за вопрос. Мы собрали материалы для датирования и передали их в Новосибирск на датирование методом АМС. Но пока результатов нет. Это нагар с керамики собрали и некоторые костяные, костяной материал.
So Victor is saying that they have collected some materials for dating, and they send it to Novosibirsk lab for MS. And the materials that they're planning to date are some ceramics. Victor, что керамика и кости?
И нагар с керамики и кости. Да.
So the salt from the ceramics and some funnel, some bone material. Спасибо.
Спасибо.
Well, maybe in the interest of time, we are running a little late, but maybe we can have our next presentation go, and then we can use our break time for questions if that works for our presenters. So our next presentation, there is a question here by Eileen. So Victor, you mentioned a medal metal artifact, and I think there was a chisel. It looked like a common sailor implement. Were those the other metal artifacts? Maybe Genya, you could maybe help with some of that.
Вопрос следующий. В один из ваших слайдов показывал число. Вот с точки зрения вопрошающего, это скорее похоже на какую-то принадлежность моряка. Были ли другие металлические предметы на этом сайте, на этом объекте?
Мы вот нашли только резец роговый, но там от металла осталась только ржавчина в пазу. То есть железо это. Но до этого вот находили то, что вот эти работники станции советской, там тоже были вот подобного рода вещи, опять вот, с железными резцами. И больше вроде бы не было металла.
Helene, so the answer is that the only other artifact coming close to metal is that chisel handle that you showed. Это был роговой или костяной?
Роговой. Из рога
Yeah,
оленя.
the bone, caribou bone, reindeer bone handle. И там, and there was a kind of like a residue of metal where the blade used to be. And besides that, there was no metal in the survey.
Okay. So our next presentation will be Natalia and Alexander, the most ancient leaf-shaped thin bifaces of South Siberia as the forerunner of bifacial technologies in Beringia.
Dear colleague, do you hear me?
I can hear you just fine. Yep.
Okay. Natalia has some problems, and so she will not be able to take a part, and we can start with my presentation the next. Is it okay?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Proceed when ready. You should be able to share screen with everyone.
Okay. 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 Thank you. Okay. Do you see my presentation?
I don't. Does anyone else?
No.
No. I think I need to push the share screen. Okay. 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 Where is it? Okay. Understand. Yes. This top one. Maybe this. Just a second.
Oh yeah. Take your time.
Okay. Yes. Take my share screen. Okay. Just one second.
Of course.
Do you hear me?
I can hear you, and I just made you a co-host. Did you just leave? There you go. Yep, perfect.
Yes, perfect. Okay, super. Okay, dear colleague, let me introduce my presentation. As you know, personal ornaments made of organic and mineral raw material are the most massive category of non-utilitarian items known across the Upper Palaeolithic of Beringia. An existing spread of personal ornaments appear to have resulted not only from significant progress in the development of ancient technologies, but also from an obvious need of Paleolithic humans for the intra-group or intergroup communication. In Paleolithic societies, such artifacts might have appeared as markers of tribal identity, gender or age, and social or marital status. Here we present the new results of the comprehensive study of production technology, functions, and spatial context of the stone adornments from the Ushki 1 site in Kamchatka. Ushki sites discovered by Nikolai Dikov at 1961 play a pivotal role in the research of the ancient past of the Northeast Siberia. For more than half a century, the collection of Ushki multi-layered sites used by researchers for solving the debatable problems of the ancient history of the Pacific North and Americas. The Ushki 1 site is located in central part of Kamchatka on southern shore of the lake with the same name. Here we can see the view for the Ushki Lake. Here we have a perfect stratigraphical sequence included about more than 20 lithological layers and about 7 cultural layers. The Upper Paleolithic layer 7, attributed to the early Ushki Upper Paleolithic culture, is traceable in the lowest horizon of the stratigraphic sequence at a depth of 2.10 to 2.20 meters. The excavation of cultural layer 7 carried out over the area more than 2,700 square meters discover a long-term settlement with 11 dwellings, 1 human burial, and working areas with high concentration of artifacts. It's assumed that the assemblage of the early Ushki Upper Paleolithic culture is a part of the non-microblade archaeological tradition of southern Northeast Siberia. The age of this settlement was determined by radiocarbon dates in the 2 main chronological intervals, about 30-40 uncalibrated BP or about 11 uncalibrated BP. We recently received a new date from previously undated dwelling of about 20 uncalibrated BP. So dating results may indicate that existence within the Paleolithic cultural layer 7 of Ushki 1 site of several stratigraphically indivisible episodes of ancient human habitation. The Upper Paleolithic layer 6 was determined by conventional and AMS dates in the chronological interval about 10,000 to 10.8 hundreds uncalibrated BP. The cultural layer 6 in Ushki 1 site was investigated over an area over more 5,000 square meters. It included more than 40 dwelling construction, 2 human burial, and 1 burial of a dog. A representative collection of stone artifacts. The late Ushki Paleolithic culture belongs to a wide range of late Paleolithic microblade complexes and tradition, including Silenja, Diptai, Beringian, Denali, and etc. As a result of 30 years of excavation at this site, a representative collection of stone ornaments was obtained, which included hundreds of items. The technology for producing personal ornaments from the Ushki 1 site involved a series of operations: the selection and delivery of raw material, the selection of blanks for a particular type of product, the creation of preforms, the perforation, ornamentation with notches. As a result of petrographic studies, we found that for the manufacture of beads and pendants, Paleolithic inhabitants of Ushki 1 site used predominantly local raw material of volcanogenic and hydrothermal origin: kaolinite, agalmetallite, talcite, chloritolite, chloride, and chloritazide biotite slate. The presence of basic and ultra-basic, intermediate and acid composition in the sites surrounding determined the availability of a wide range of mineral raw material which had a low hardness, which contribute to the relatively easy processing. Analysis of the collection revealed a series of teeny pebbles and poorly rounded pieces of raw material, the appearance of which indicates transportation from the banks of watercourses. Here we can see the territory where the Paleolithic inhabitants of Ushki site take the raw material. It's a central part of Kamchatka. Okay. At this stage of the study, we can judge two methods for obtaining blanks of the adornments: napping fine-grained rocks of medium or large size by stone hammer, or splitting of slate pieces into thin plates. Here we can see the blanks and preference of beads and pendants with trace of grinding. Also preference of beads with the same traces. The next production stage involved processing the preference of beads and pendants using abrasive tools made of fine-grained, tough and sandstone. Next, biconical holes were formed using a small diameter stone drill in the resulting preforms. Then some of pendants they used short parallel notches for the ornamentation. Yes. Okay. We did a user analysis for the stone ornaments. Here we can see some photos with image of trace of wear and production. It's a very specific view, I think. Okay. User analysis made it possible to reveal evidence of lifetime use, one or two flattened sides of the plaques and parts of studded pendants. We saw the traces for the impact of thread of thin strap resulting from sewing to clothing. On some pendants, traces of repair were recorded. So beads and most pendants were used as the components of necklace and amulets. The concentric grooves from drilling inside the holes of this adornment are practically not preserved, which indicates their long and relatively free movement along the thread. Here on the slide, we can see the collection of the next culture layer, layer 6, which differ somewhat in typology from the older items from layer 7. However, in terms of technology and raw material, this is much in common between them. You can see the very variable raw material and forms, unique forms. It's somewhat like a labrid-like plugs, trace of wear and production. Okay, according to the spatial analysis data, all items of the ornaments production are confined at the Ushki-1 sites, settlements to dwellings, remains, and the space around the fireplace. Here we can see the spatial distribution of blanks and preforms of personal ornaments and the adornments. Most of finished objects at layer 7, about 8,081 beads, 3 pendants, and 1 plug, cue from the human burial, and some individual cluster. So we can see the spectral distribution of abrasive tools, which used for the producing the stone ornaments here. So we can see that these finds we can occur from some dwellings. Okay, burial from layer 7. Its stratigraphic profile, plan. This dots, it's bits, it's local cluster of bits. And here in square 11Z, we can see another cluster, something like maybe pendant from bits. Okay, if we see the spatial distribution of personal ornaments from cultural 6, we can see the same picture. Most of the ornaments occur from dwellings. So here we can see not only abrasive tools, but grinders, which used for producing the ochre. Okay. In the context of cultural 6, pendants and beads, lungs of these ornaments and tools for its production were found in residential and industrial complexes. Single pendants with traces of utilization were found in the context of 2 collector burials. Here you can see one of them. I think on the slide here, it's remains of stone ornaments. It's bifaces with cores and a lot of other findings. Okay. Yes, some photos from the burial of layer 6, part of the skull, human skull. This is the pendants. Yes. Okay, what about analogies? Unfortunately, we do not yet know the whole analogies of such technology in East Beringia, in Alaska. However, we know of examples in the rest of North America in a relatively early context. Of course, we do not claim that the spread of technology for producing stone beads and pendants in America resulted from migration from the Kamchatka. However, the presence of such analogies make to us some things. It would be interesting to see this collection in life. Okay. In conclusion, I would like to thank the organizers of the conference personally for the opportunity to share the results of my research. Thank you for your attention.
A great presentation. We have time for questions. If anyone has any questions for Natalia and Alexander or Victor from earlier.
Maybe I'll ask a question. I again don't see anybody jumping in, so hopefully I'm not cutting anyone. Александр, может быть, я пропустила, у вас были какие-то предположения, как, то есть как бы эти бусины, они были только вот в шнуровом варианте или есть какие-то варианты реконструкции их связи с одеждой, какими-то другими предметами быта? So my question is, if Alexander thinks that what they found as far as beads on this site, like these beads were just kind of presented as collection of individual beads, or if there is any way to reconstruct association with clothing or maybe any other objects, assemblages.
Я могу по-русски ответить, а вы переведете, да? Правильно? Или могу...
Да, давайте.
По-русски будет просто более грамотно.
Хорошо.
Как бы я кратко, конечно, постарался на всем остановиться. Естественно, здесь как бы каждый из аспектов, который я осветил, он более разноплановый.
So I for the brevity's sake, I was going really fast, but every aspect of my presentation has multiple dimensions.
Да, что касается как бы использования украшений и конструкций с этим связанных, здесь есть данные об использовании украшений как частей как бы нанизанных, да, вещей, то есть в качестве ниток, и в том числе и нашивных изделий.
So in terms of how those beads were used by the people who occupied the site, we have kind of two sets of data, and in some cases we can see that they were stringed on some kind of a thread, and in some cases we postulate that they were actually attached to the clothing, they were sewn to something.
И об этом нам говорят не только данные как бы USV-анализа, но еще и данные планиграфии.
Данные чего?
Планиграфии, ну то есть spatial context, в общем, по-английски говоря.
So, and this is based not just on our visual experience on the site, but also on spatial positioning of the beads.
Да, на примере погребения, который я показывал самым первым, было видно, когда его, собственно, раскапывал Николай Николаевич Диков, что часть изделий там были, как бы, залегали, будучи нанизанными, да, как бы, вот как они сохранились, будучи положены туда, а часть лежали плашмя, как бы, и, соответственно, они были пришитыми, вот как на иллюстрации вот сейчас здесь на слайде.
And one of the things which you could see from the sites, and particularly from that slide which illustrates Nikolai Dikov's excavation, is that the beads, some of them are positioned on the side as they would be if they are kind of stringed together on the cord of sort, and some are laying flat as if they were attached to a piece of material of some sort.
Вот. Но к тому же нам об этом говорят следы использования. Они различные для вещей, которые нанизывались, или вещей, которые пришивались. Это разные типы следов, они четко идентифицируются, четко различаются, как бы, ну, такой вот.
And you could also see kind of like the traces of use. There is a way to tell if it was just stringed to something, the bead was just stringed to something, or it was actually attached more firmly.
There's another question for Alexander by Jason. Alexander, is there evidence for labrets or labrets in any of the Ushki levels? And Genya, maybe you could pronounce the Russian word there.
Ну, так, это, наверное, так и есть, да, Саша? Вы, мне кажется, поняли. Это вопрос о том, были ли какая-то информация об использовании вот вставок, да, губных обреток в любых уровнях этого памятника.
Да, спасибо, я вопрос понял, сейчас я найду. Ну, в общем, тут тоже своя история, короче говоря, есть, но я, конечно, не буду долго расписываться. Скажу, что вот на слайде изделия, которые представлены на слайде, когда-то давно их Николай Николаевич Диков рассматривал в качестве своеобразных лабреток. Однако, на мой взгляд, это, конечно, не лабретки, поскольку они сделаны из очень мягкого материала, который не способен прокалывать кожу, там, да, человеческую и так далее. Эти вещи явно нашивные, то есть это какая-то, возможно, имитация лабреток, возможно.
So the interpretation of this object as labrets also comes from Nikolai Dikov, and I'm not completely convinced, not completely agree with this interpretation, and my reasoning for that is this material is quite soft, so I don't think it would be able to pierce skin, and I also think that that is probably kind of decorative element which was sewn to clothing for decoration.
An additional question.
Okay.
How would you characterize the ceramics found in the dwellings? Could you say a little about the context for ceramics in the region?
Понятен вопрос?
Про керамику?
Да.
Ну, я, конечно,
I think that question was for Victor.
Oh, it was for Victor. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Да, я тоже думаю, что не было.
Это вопрос для вас. Вы еще с нами?
Да, я здесь.
О, замечательно. Окей.
Я вот сейчас постараюсь в чате ответить.
А вам понятен вопрос?
Ну, я переведу сейчас его, да.
Хотите, я вам переведу?
Ну, давайте.
Вопрос о том, как вы могли бы охарактеризовать керамику, которую вы видели в ваших памятниках? Как это соотносится с общим контекстом керамических изделий в вашем регионе?
Это совершенно своеобразная керамика, хотя вот, ну, у нас имеются, да, вот в ранних культурах неолита шнуровая, рубчатая керамика, да, но здесь видно, что вот эта керамика, она специфическая, она отличается.
Давайте я буду потихонечку переводить. So, this is complicated question, but also a good one. We have examples of ceramics in our region, and we have some examples of court decorations, but these ceramic samples are very different.
Ну, она толстая такая, вот видно, что стенки толстые, ну, довольно так как-то грубо слепленные, что ли, да, и прямо очень много вот пищевого нагара на ней. Это, ну, как бы тоже бросается в глаза.
So, couple of things which are immediately visible is that shards are thicker and made more crudely than other examples of ceramics in our region. And another thing which is which everybody, our team members paid attention to, noticed right away, was that has a very thick burnt food residue on the surface of the ceramic fragments.
И состав теста вот керамического, он тоже специфический. Там крупная примесь минеральная идет, вот прямо заметно так. Такого.
And the body of the ceramic is also different. As I try to show, there are some large fragments of mineral intrusion used in the body.
Ну, все вроде.
Well, that's basically it.
Well, I guess maybe we can go on to our third presentation, which I believe is also by Alexander. New data on the earliest Upper Paleolithic personal adornments of Kamchatka.
Саша, вы сможете эту презентацию сделать, да?
Я только что ее сделал.
Okay. I think there was a little bit of confusion. Natalia's presentation got canceled, if I understand correctly, right?
Gotcha.
Right,
okay.
Alexander?
Okay.
So we're basically on schedule.
Perfect then. Okay.
Yeah, good. So it's a pity that Natalia couldn't join us, but I'm glad that Alexander could.
Yeah.
Большое.
Well then, Evguenia, it is your turn. Yeah.
Okay, I'll give it a try.
Okay.
Okay. From the beginning. Okay. How is it? Can you guys see it?
I can see it just perfect. Yep.
That's good.
Evguenia, are you there, or did we lose you maybe? I think we lost Genya. Oh, no, there she is.
I think I got dropped. Am I back again?
You're back.
Okay, let me try it again. Sorry about this. Sam, please let me know that you see things. Do you see my presentation?
I can see your presentation just fine. Yep. I don't know if I can hear you though. Yeah, Genya, I guess when you go and share your screen, like Amber said, we can see it, but we can't hear you. Can you hear us?
Hello?
Hey, Genya. So every time it seems like every time you share it, we lose your sound.
Yeah. Let me try one more time, and if that doesn't work, I'll have to relocate to the office and see if the connection would be more, more effective. Okay.
I wonder, Genya, I wonder if you want to email your presentation to me, and I could share it, screen share it, and then you could talk through it if this doesn't work.
We can try. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you. Can everyone else?
I can hear her. Yeah.
Okay. Well, let me try. If I disappear, please let me know. So many thanks to Alaska Anthropological Association for taking care of this session the very last second. It's very nice to know that you guys are willing to help us with our work in Beringia. My presentation today is about one specific object which I came across in 2015 while working in the Smithsonian Museum of Natural History archaeological collection. It is a very peculiar object, and it comes from the native village of Kiŋigin, which we now know as Wales. And what is kind of got my attention right away, which depicts, kind of looks like horse-like creature with walrus tusks. So it's really easy to get fascinated with that. The artifact is made of bronze, and according to the provenance record, it came from the NMN age, to the National Museum of Natural History, from Museum of American Indian in DC too. And MAI got that artifact from Clark Garber in 1958. Garber in turn supposedly obtained it from a local individual in Wales, who again supposedly got it from. So it's easy to probably understand why I got fascinated with this object. Not only is the depiction, the creature is interesting, but every time we come across metal artifacts in Alaska or glass objects, it kind of commands our attention because these are introduced in exotic materials, the completion.
Evgenia, I think we lost you.
Sam, I wonder if we should move on to Jason Rogers' paper, and then in the meantime, maybe one of us could get Jenia's paper, and is that maybe a good idea? Or
Yeah, that works for me. Jason, would you be up for starting, and then we could have our break?
Yeah, that sounds good. Jenia just texted me. She's going to relocate to the office, her office, and where there's a more stable internet connection.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, let me find my, let's see if I can do this. Okay, if I share screen. All right, have you got my screen?
We can see it just fine. Yep.
Terrific. Okay, so I'm Jason Rogers. I'm the park archaeologist for Lake Clark National Park and Preserve. Talking today about a carved wooden hunting bow that was found in the park last fall. And that's what you see here in this opening slide. But as we begin, I just want to mention what a privilege it is for me to be able to live and work and experience this amazing land, this amazing landscape, which is the ancestral home and lands of the Denaina people. And in the same vein, I would like to thank the organizers of this session. I'd like to thank Jenia and Sam and Lincoln for, Sam and Amber for agreeing to moderate. So just to orient ourselves geographically, Lake Clark is located in Southwest Alaska at the base of the Alaska Peninsula, just north of Iliana Lake, at the juncture of the Aleutian and Alaska mountain ranges. And on the park map, you can see how the boundaries of the park extend from Cook Inlet on the east, across the Aleutian and Alaska ranges to the Bristol Bay Piedmont on the west. A landscape of glacial valleys, of lakes, rivers, volcanoes, mountains. This is, depending on how you count, either the second or third least visited national park in the entire National Park Service system. Famous today mainly for bears, and salmon, other wildlife. And of course, as I mentioned, it is the ancestral and current home of the Denaina people. So I'd like to bring your attention to Talaquana Lake, that is Dilavena, fish swim in lake, which is located in the northern part of the park. This is the second largest lake in Lake Clark National Park after Lake Clark itself. Again, located in the northern part of the park on the west slope of the Alaska Range. It drains into the Stony River and thence into the Kuskokwim. So it's the only major lake in the park that drains north into the Kuskokwim rather than southwest into the Nushagak drainage. Okay, back to the picture in the opening slide. At the very end of last field season, some of our water quality technicians were retrieving a data logger, a temperature data logger from the outlet of the lake. And I'd like to mention that we have nearly 40 years of water quality data from this lake. So that's kind of an interesting correlate, something just a tremendous amount of data. So our techs were retrieving the temperature data logger, and they found this artifact on the bottom in several feet of water at the outlet of the lake. Here's the location. So there is a Danaina term for this particular location, meaning the outlet of Fish Swim In Lake. So you can see it there at the west. And just as an aside, there's a truly prolific amount of Danaina place names in the vicinity. These are some of the recorded ones. I'm sure there are many more, but it just shows how this landscape was important to the Danaina people, continues to be important to the Danaina people. And I'm indebted to Jim Carey and Jared Smith for their amazing web atlas of Alaska Dene place names. I use it all the time. And I also want to mention that this find spot is essentially the exact location of the northern terminus of the Talaquana Trail. The Talaquana Trail is that really landscape corridor, not really a trail, but a corridor of movement that people used and continue to use to travel between Talaquana Lake and the enormous Dene settlement at Kiŋigin on Lake Clark. So back to the bow, it was recovered by Park Service personnel and then flown immediately to the Park Service regional office in Anchorage for conservation and curation. And sort of an amazing thing, we were able to get a float plane in to pick the artifact up and fly it back to town. And the very next day, the lake began to ice up. So that was really the last flyable day, at least on floats, you know, until the lake completely ices up and we could get in on skis. So got it out basically just in time and got it into the lab where the conservation process began. Our curator, Katie Myers, working with conservation experts from the Park Service Conservation Institute, determined that the best way to treat this artifact was to slowly dry it out. Of course, it was waterlogged. It had been in the water for quite some time. So that process was conducted using muslin, a muslin wrap. The bow was kept in a muslin wrap in a temperature and humidity controlled environment and allowed to gradually dry out to stabilize without cracking or checking. And then, of course, we were able to examine the artifact, to record it and to document significant features. 136 centimeters in length. It has that curved shape that you could see in previous slides. It was constructed using steam bending or heat bending, almost certainly steam. There's no evidence that there was any backing, any sort of sinew or other type of backing. There's no marks along the edge or any sort of marking that cordage would have left. And the most significant feature of this artifact or features are these knock-ins where the bowstrings themselves would have been attached. And it turns out that these are really diagnostic features when we're trying to identify the topology and maybe understand who made the bow and where it came from. Back to that steam bent recurved shape, we know that it's bent because the grain along the thickness is completely consistent. This was not profiled out of a larger, thicker piece of wood. It was originally cut to this exact thickness and then steam bent. This is a really complicated procedure as the wood fibers are compressed on the inside of the curve, on the inside of the bend, and stretched on the outside of the bend. This procedure often results in splitting and cracking under tension. And you can see how the maker of the bow addressed exactly that problem by carefully cutting away the split end to prevent further stress cracking at this one bend. So there's small amounts of stress cracking on both the recurve bends. It's slightly worse on one of them, and the maker carefully shaved away the splinters to prevent those stress cracks from continuing along the length of the bow. We're lucky to have some real specialists in town and locally, people who understand bow technology. So we invited folks over to take a look at it. This is, of course, Rich Vanderhook, our state archaeologist from the Office of History and Archaeology, and Aaron Leggett from the native village of Eklutna, and also from the Anchorage Museum. They both came over and examined the bow. We had some elders from our community, our source villages around Lake Clark. This is Butch Hobson and George Alexei from Non-Dalton, who came over and looked at the bow and told us many stories about that they'd heard from their parents and grandparents about bow technology and manufacture and usage. We also had Dr. Priscilla Morris from the Forest Service. She's a wood speciation expert. She came over and examined the bow with her hand lens and brought many samples. Her conclusion is that the wood species is likely Picea. It's likely a spruce. Without doing a thin section and looking under a microscope, she can't really tell us anything further. We decided against cutting the bow in half to do a thin section. So we conducted documentation, of course, at every step, including measured drawings and caliper measurements along the entire length of the artifact. One striking thing about this bow is the incredible symmetry that it exhibits over the entire length of it. It varies only by millimeters in its symmetry end to end. It's really an amazing piece of work. So the big question everybody wants to know, how old is it? So we did sample it for dating, got exactly 2 milligrams of material, which is currently in pre-treatment at the lab at the Center for Applied Isotope Research right now. So I don't have a result to share with you yet. So stay tuned on that. Those results should be coming literally within days. And I will certainly share those results with anybody who's interested as soon as I have them. And then Katie and I also conducted some preliminary comparative analysis, trying to understand maybe where and who might have made this bow. It's a good match for Hamilton's Type 3. You can see here that's got that recurve shape. Now, Hamilton actually based that Type 3 on a bow collected by Murdoch in 1890 from, quote, the mouth of the Kuskokwim River. So that's already pretty interesting. The mouth of the Kuskokwim River is quite a distance from Talaquana Lake, which, as you saw, is at on the western edge of the mountains. So we began sort of comparative analysis looking at museum collections, both in Alaska and elsewhere around the country. These are typical Athabaskan or Dene bows from the University of Alaska Museum of the North ethnographic collection. And you can see this is not really a good match for the Dene type bows. Most of these Athabaskan bows are straight with a wrist guard. Really a completely different form. Looking at the very distinctive knock-ins, we were able to come up with some better matches, some better analogies, in particular the one on the left there. And as we got into this, we realized there's really a plethora of knock-in forms and types. It's really pretty interesting. I'm not a bow expert at all. So it was a big learning curve for me to understand that. One of the best matches in the university ethnographic collection is this bow that was collected by Otto Geist near Dillingham in 1927. So again, out on the coast or in a coastal region, quite some distance from the glacial lakes in Lake Clark National Park. But perhaps the best matches came, interestingly enough, in the form of miniatures that were excavated at Hooper Bay in 1950. And if we zoom in on those knock-ins, you can see that this is really a pretty good match for the Talaquana bow knock-in type. And I'm not suggesting that our bow necessarily was manufactured in Hooper Bay, which is some 600 kilometers distant, but it certainly seems a better match for a Western Alaska type, maybe perhaps a Yupik type, than a Dene Athabaskan type. So it's really an intriguing story. You know, what is a Western Alaskan bow of that type doing in the bottom of a lake on the edge of the mountains, some hundreds of kilometers away. So of course we know that people were trading and raiding and intermarrying and moving around and meeting and having conflicts and warring and all the sort of things that people do. So it's just really intriguing artifact. It's really intriguing question of how it came to be where we found it. So hoping that further analysis, including the radiocarbon dating and other comparative materials, might give us some hints or clues as to what the story of this bow actually is. And we do invite interested researchers to contact us. Please let us know if you have any ideas or if people are simply interested in viewing the artifact. By all means, let us know. Contact myself or Katie Myers or anybody on the Lake Clark National Park Cultural Resources team, and we can certainly arrange that. I would very much like to thank Angie and Josh at the University of Alaska Museum of the North and a host of other people who helped us and talked to us about this bow. And if anybody has any questions, I would be glad to take them now.
That's a really cool talk. Thank you, Jason. Questions for Jason? We are going to go on break from, oh yes, iPad 3.
I think I have a question. This is Claire, Claire Alix. Can you hear me?
We can, yep.
I had two questions actually, or comments. I was looking at one of the photos that you showed where I was surprised that you said that there was no lashing marks on the bow because of how flat the back is. And there was one photo you showed that it seemed on the side maybe that there was some very, very faint marks, but I'm sure you looked at it very carefully, but it's just on the photo, it just seemed that from what I've seen elsewhere that it could be lashing marks. And then the other thing is that, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
And also for the identification, you don't need to cut the bow in half. You just need a very small sliver of wood to look at the idea of the species. So you wouldn't have to make a big hole. Yeah. I just wanted to say that.
Let me address those in turn. Yeah. So there is quite a bit of discoloration up and down the length of the bow, and it's different.
Oh, I can't hear
that's
you.
because the way the bow was resting in the water. So there is some biological side that was up. And there's also some sediment that we have not removed. We've not really cleaned the artifact. So there is quite a bit of discoloration. I was more interested to see if there would be any depressions where that cordage might have pulled into the wood. And I could not find any evidence for any kind of depression, or, you know, the surface of the wood is perfectly smooth and the corners of the wood are perfectly smooth. So, so for that reason, I say it was difficult for me to find any evidence of backing or anywhere where the cordage might have been wrapped, because it didn't leave any impressions. So, but you're right.
It's actually not, from what I've seen on many bows, actually, you don't really have a depression. It's a slight discoloration on the wood from where the tendon was, and then so you're gonna have a different coloration of the wood. And since it's been in the water for so long, the coloring that the wood would have gotten would be different between where there was lashing and where there wasn't. So, but it would be very much washed out because it was in the water. But I mean, I'd be happy to look at it, but it seemed to me from that photo where you showed the side, that to me, from what I've seen elsewhere, that could be sign of lashing, of transverse lashing, not the one from the two hands of the bow, but the transverse one. Sure.
Yeah. And if next time you're in Anchorage, please come by and take a look. We'd be glad for you to take a look at it. And yeah, it's, there were lots of examples with lashing and lots of examples without. So it's to me, it's sort of an open question. Yeah. And regarding the speciation, sometimes when you're conserving an artifact or transporting it, a tiny little fragment drops off and you can use that. I have to say that fortunately or unfortunately, this one is so well preserved. The wood is so well consolidated that there were no little fragments, nothing dropped off, nothing broke off. So so we don't even have a little sliver, that we can use.
Yeah, you made a hole in it, so I think you could take a small sliver somewhere. But anyway.
Yeah, the curator, take that up with Katie.
Yes. Okay.
All right.
Thanks for your interest.
So we'll be on break, but we'll have chat going, and if people have questions for our presenters thus far, feel free. But we'll be coming back at 3:40 Alaska time with Evgenia's presentation. So we'll start up at 3:40. Thanks. For those just joining, we'll start back up in about 5 minutes. For those also who just joined, we switched Evguenia and Jason Rogers' presentation due to technical difficulties. We apologize for that. So we'll be starting at 3:40 with Evgenia's presentation. So. So Evgenia, you were made a co-host again if you wanted to kind of get your stuff together, and we can get started in about 30 seconds or so.
It says host disabled participant screen sharing.
Ah, shoot. Okay, let's try it
Probably
again.
need to push a button, something.
Try it now.
Okay. Share. Okay, how's the sound? Can you still hear me?
I can still hear you and I can see it. I can't see you, but I can see your presentation.
That's the important part, yeah. Okay, well, hopefully it works.
Cool. All right, well, welcome back, everyone. This is the second half of the shared Beringia session. For those who missed the first half, we switched Jason and Evgenia due to technical difficulties, but we're starting now with Evgenia's talk. Take it away, Evgenia.
Okay, thank you. Sorry if I repeat a few things. I don't know when I got cut out. So my presentation today is inspired by a singular object, a bronze medallion from the native village of Wales in Alaska, which I came across when I was working at the Museum of Natural History in Washington, DC. I think it was about 2015, kind of had it on hold for a while. So the artifact is a bronze medallion. It measures to about 6.5 centimeters in diameter and has about 3 millimeter thickness. It's made of bronze, and it depicts a very peculiar creature, which got my attention right away. According to the provenience record, this object came to the Museum of Natural History from the Museum of American Indians, which in turn acquired it from Clark Garber in 1958. And again, according to the same record, Garber obtained it from a local individual in Wales who, quote, got it from a shaman's grave. So it's easy to get excited about things like this. Not only it's a very strange creature depicted on the medallion, but also metal finds in Alaska, Alaskan sites command archaeologists' attention. Along with glass objects, metal artifacts are often introduced exotic materials with implication of long distance travel and trade. And here are the two comparatively recent examples of archaeological objects of kind of this nature. The bronze buckle from Cape Espenberg and the beads, which some of which were traced to Venice. So with my curiosity, there were also a lot of questions. So first of all, there was a question about iconography and original purpose of this object. You know, what in the world is this animal? Is it a horse with a walrus tusk? So the description, again, the object description in the museum collection described it as a hoofed quadruped. And, you know, the things, the part of the face of the horse or quadruped, which kind of looks like tusks, is probably revoked reins. So it still looks to me like somebody actually worked on this artifact to make it look more like a walrus. It's not just a coincidental thing. So the next question is when and where it was made, how did it come to Wales, Alaska? Can it be linked to any known archaeological sites? And what does it actually say about interconnectivity of the Bering Strait region? So a few words about the collector. Clark M. Garber was superintendent of education at Cape Prince of Wales between 1927 and 1933, after which he assumed position of superintendent of the Western District of Alaska and lived in Kuskokwim River village of Akiak. So his interest in Alaska Native culture and history is evidenced by a number of publications which he produced, including the article on indigenous mortuary customs of Western Alaska, which touches upon both Wales and the Kuskokwim area where he worked. He actually has fairly large collection. Most of it is at the National Museum of American Indian, and it actually contains over 500 objects from Bering Strait region, Kuskokwim, Nelson Island, and other locations, including some Russian trade items you can see on this slide collected in Wales. These are kind of typical Russian trade, transcontinental trade items in Alaskan context. So you have your bells, you have beads, you have buttons. What we have at the Museum of Natural History in this medallion is kind of unusual, and to the best of my understanding is unique. I don't know at this point any other object of this type coming from Alaska. So if any of you have seen something like this, I'd be really interested to care about this. So there are Russian medals in Alaskan sites and Russian medallions, but typically these are kind of government issued, Russian Empire government issued tokens of Russian expeditions and colonization efforts, such as this medal on the left, which is called the Allies of Russia, which was given to usually indigenous chiefs who collaborated with Russian colonial powers, or the medal on your right, which was issued to commemorate the expedition of Billings, Sarachev, and Bofa from Alaska State Museum. So this medallion obviously doesn't look like anything like it, and is very, very different. What it kind of brings superficially to mind is some of Russian coinage. As you could see here, Russian coins often depicted a mounted figure, either a prince of a sort, or more often St. George, who was a holy patron of Moscow and became a holy patron of Russia once Moscow became capital. However, that resemblance is also sort of superficial, and there is a tremendous difference between the dimensions of Wales artifact and the Russian coins. So the next thing, which kind of, maybe not usual suspect, but something which got my attention, is this type of artifacts, which are actually mirrors. Mirrors which didn't have any handle, and basically one side of this metal mirror would be polished, and the opposite side, the reverse, typically was embellished by different design elements. So in Siberia, these items, these kind of metals, mirrors, show up fairly early, about circa like 1000, the first millennium BC, and remained in circulation until the 19th century. They changed the morphology, and they changed kind of the place of origin, the place of manufacture. So as I said, the first mirrors which came to Siberia, particularly Eastern Siberia, came from China and were traded with Siberian people. But then they also, like some of the mirrors came from Central Asia. And once those mirrors became kind of an established trading item, and Russia began moving across Siberia towards the Far East, towards Bering Sea, Russian traders and merchants were very keen on following this tradition in bringing their own mirrors of that type to the indigenous market of Siberia, which was already kind of conditioned to receive these items and was interested in them. So the item on your right is metal mirror from Central Russia with center image. So I want to talk about these objects just a little bit. It might look at this point as a far cry from Wales artifact, but I promise I'll bring you there. So first of all, it might be surprising to find center in Russian made object. It's not a typical figure which is kind of associated with the mental perception of what the Russian ornamentation would look like. But it was actually fairly popular in Russia. The stories of center came to Russia in early Middle Ages, probably in pre-Christian times, and kind of centers became a folk element of folk art and element of church art. So as you can see here, there is a kind of like a leaflet of depicting center fighting with a mounted warrior, and on your right there is actually Russian-made plate depicting center from Saint Sophia Cathedral in Novgorod the Great, which is probably made around 15th century AD. So why those mirrors with center depiction are important? Well, they're actually really widespread in many Siberian sites in both Western Siberia and Eastern Siberia. So here's a map which Okladnikov put together in 1950s. So it depicts some of the finds of those round mirrors, metal mirrors with center on the back of it in different sites. And you could see that it goes to both sides of Ural Mountains. And this is an article which was written in 1950s. And since that time, there were a lot of discoveries of this type. So this data set is more than doubled. So Okladnikov's interest in these mirrors was inspired by one particular find which he made when he was looking at the site on Fadey Islands, in the Fadey Islands group, which is on the Taimyr Peninsula. You can see the red circle on that map. It's a very peculiar, very interesting site. It's probably either a place of a shipwreck party or maybe kind of wintering station, which for some reason was abandoned. The site assemblage yielded large quantity of coins, different furs, clothing, compass, and other ship-related items. And along with those items, it had a very large silver mirror, which Okladnikov studied and wrote a really interesting article about. So his research and the research which was done after him showed that it was very widely spread item of trade with indigenous people. As I said, it was shown in Western Siberia. It appears in Eastern Siberia and has many different examples in different use. So on the right here, you see Yukagir woman's apron with in the center of which there is a medallion with a centaur. So you could see the close up under the apron. And this apron was purchased by Waldemar Johansson for the National Museum of Natural History in New York. So in the regions west of the Ural Mountains, these items were particularly popular among Nenets, Khanty, and Mansi people. And we see the trade in the mirrors and metal mirrors in 16th and 19th century. Just to be clear, these metal artifacts were not always decorated with just center images. They could have different representations, including horses and dogs and deers and different mythological subjects. Center was particularly important though, and seems like it was getting a lot of attention for ritualistic purposes and ritualistic meanings, especially among Nenets people. Russian academician of German origin Georg Miller wrote in the middle of 18th century that Nenets people had a deity called Uneta, which resembled centaur in a way that it embodied features of both a person and the horse. And by the 17th century, a number of workshops in Central Russia were manufacturing metal medallions specifically for indigenous trade. And while maintaining resemblance with mirrors, those medallions were not technically manufactured as mirrors anymore. They were not meant for this purpose. They were meant to be used in trade. and sometimes had special holes and loops for attachment to accommodate indigenous use as decorations for women's clothing and shamans' regalia. And on the left, you see the evenk use of kind of a large, plain, very plain metal medallions, and also a more elaborate piece of metal decoration on the boot. And both these items are associated with shamanistic practices, and in the museum record of Russian Ethnographic Museum are marked as shamans' regalia. So it's just a few interesting examples. One of my favorite examples is the crown on your right. That crown belonged to the last renowned Ganasan shaman and storyteller Tubiak Kastelnik. He belonged to Qatŋut's clan, and he lived fairly recently. He died in an accident in 1989, but the item itself didn't just come with his lifetime. It was in the family for many generations, and kind of served as an idol mediating families' connection with the higher powers and communication medium for connecting with spirits and deities. And you cannot see it in the picture, but one of those medallions also depicted the center image. So the point I'm trying to make here is that those items were in Siberian trade, and they're particularly sought out and liked as decoration items, but also as items of some sort of special powers and special connections with the spirits. So about 1640, towards the second half of 17th century, Russian trade in Siberia starts making a shift from bringing pretty objects all the way from Central Russia to Siberia to actually bringing raw materials, bringing the metals, and then working those materials into objects which could be used for trade in Siberian sites. And this becomes the time when local workshops in different parts of particularly Central and Eastern Siberia are manned by indigenous artists who in many cases did not have a content, and since which they were supposed to reproduce looking at the Central Russian made objects. And that results in very interesting local production, very interesting local iconographic moments, such as a bronze mirror from Magadan on your left, where you could still see connection of center to center, but it's much more stylized. And yeah, particularly like his wings that look almost like a dragonfly wings. And the bronze mirror from Indigirka on your right is another example of that creative reinterpretation of the image, which maybe didn't necessarily make sense right away to indigenous artists in Eastern Siberia. So this is seemingly a take on the center image, but it didn't make much sense to have that man's torso on the horse's body. So it just got cut off, and you end up with half of the horse and that kind of combination of basically almost non-figurative art above it. It also was a time when the local beliefs and local iconography or local stories began affecting production of such objects. And, you know, the time when the center began kind of moving away, and instead a more realistic images of mountain figure, the figure of the rider on the horse becomes more popular. And those figures sometimes are clearly linked or somewhat linked to local deities, like the pendant on your left is representing Siviki, god of Evenki people. They also sometimes have kind of additional symbolism, like a solar symbolism you see on the right, with those rays on the around the image, so connecting with solar beliefs in Siberian indigenous cultures. And it's really interesting because Yukagirs actually had a special name for these medallions, and they called them chest suns. So that solar influence kind of overlaps with figurative representation of the rider. So there are a lot of different layers to it. These objects are often found in burial context in Siberia, and in quite a few places they were found on the bodies of the people, of deceased people, kind of in the center of the chest, so placed very prominently and obviously for ritualistic purposes. Such sites include Nigotsk burial, Palu River Cemetery, and the Island of the Dead in Kala Pagor on Ob River. So, oh my gosh, okay. So there was a bit of a confusion in my slides. Sorry about this. So I think you could see the connection of the objects of this metal, bronze, silver mirrors in Siberian sites to the artifact from Wales. However, the iconography itself, this horse, this creature on Wales artifact, does not really resemble closely neither riders, which I showed before, nor the center. What it does look like to me is the particular way the horse was represented in the art of what's now Republic of Sakha, in the art of Yakut people. Here you could see the petroglyph along the Lena River and several pendants which were actually designed to decorate the horse saddle and horse equipment for Yakut people. Different people call this kind of iconographic representation of the horse differently. One of my favorite is a moose-muzzled horse, or another one is a beaked horses. And there is the particular element which I like about this comparison is that you could see how the reins on these pendants on your right kind of become one line with the mouth of the horse and goes all the way down. And I actually see representational similarity in that with our artifact from Wales. However, it's much cruder than these pendants, and possibly what I would like to suggest about this is that it was one of those examples of artifacts, the mirror-like artifacts, which were not manufactured in Central Russia, but came from maybe one of the smaller workshops in Yakutia, what's now Republic of Sakha. So here's where my slide got moved out. Okay, so going back to our questions, which we asked in the beginning, can we answer any of them? So I would like to propose that we could hypothesize about when and where it was made. I think based on stylistic analysis, we can postulate that it was made in 19th century and probably in one of the workshops in the territory of Sakha Republic. Having XRF analysis would probably be very helpful and could tell us more about it, particularly because in Russia, there has been some research done in analyzing bronze pendants of this type. There is a study from 2015 on those mirrors from Taimyr Peninsula, and there is a database of different signatures, different metal composition breakdowns. So what else can we try to answer from our questions in the beginning? One of the questions is, how did it come to Wales, Alaska? And I would like to say that I think that for me, the connection of this object in Wales with a shamanistic grave is an indication that this object came not through colonial trade, not through European trade, but arrived through indigenous trade network. Why I think so? Because it appears to me that that object didn't show up silent. It came with the story. It came contextualized. It had clear connection with shamanistic powers. And it was, if we can trust record, which is provenance record in the museum, it was understood as such in Alaska. So there are some scenarios, several scenarios, how that could have happened. It is possible that this object wasn't obtained in Alaska, but rather by an Alaskan individual traveling across the Bering Strait and maybe observing this ritualistic use of this basically foreign and unseen previously object to him or her, and brought it back as an object of power, and that probably even acquired more power through that trade, through the shamanistic voyage, through the journey to other land. It's also possible that it came to Alaska through indigenous trade network, maybe to Wales directly, because there were direct connections, but maybe arrived through one of the native trade fairs, which we'll hear about later. The interesting thing which I'd like to mention is that it seems that this connection may be not immediately related to Chukotka, but to the region south of Chukotka. But I will admit I need to do more research on whether the metal objects did show up in connection to shamanistic powers of Chukchi or Yupik people. I have not seen the examples of such shamanistic objects yet. So next question, can it be linked to any of known archaeological sites? The Wales Cemetery site is the only one which comes to mind. Given Garber's interest in cemeteries and burial practices, it would make sense that he would be interested in the things which come from the cemetery, and whether he acquired it himself or really acquired from somebody else is probably not going to be known for sure, unless there is a record too about this in oral histories of Wales, which would be another fantastic source of information, and definitely something I'd like to do in the future research and future analysis. And so the last question is, what does it actually say about the connectivity of Beringia? And I think that from the point of its historical context, Wales medallion is a part of extensive and specialized trading network. Geographically, this object's history links Wales, Alaska with metallurgical centers of Central Russia and Yakutia, and through association with just the type of item with China. In broader cultural context, the artifact is connected to indigenous use of similar objects by Nenets, Khanty, Mansi, Ganasans, Yakut, Evenk, and Yukagir. So it's like a big family of native cultural use and native cultural connections. I want to say that there were some finds of the same type found in Sakhalin and Chukotka, but just a singular examples of that.
Evguenia, I'm very sorry, but in the interest of time, you have 1 minute, eh?
Okay, yeah. So it's a story of interconnectivity. I think this object exemplifies the connections across the Beringia region and beyond, going to Western Siberia. And to understand it, we have to be able to connect our Alaskan material with Russian materials. And to do that, we should continue our dialogue, and we should be able to exchange information and grow together and grow our knowledge together. And this is something which is extremely important today, probably more than just a week ago, given our political situation. So thank you very much for your attention. And thank you to Sam and Amber, Ryan Jones, who will help us with translation, Jason, who was willing to help with that, Alaska Anthropological Association, Smithsonian Museum of Natural History, and my Russian colleagues, Maria Safronova, Viktor Dyakonov, and Polina Parfenova. Thank you for your attention.
Great. So I'm Amber Lincoln. I'm going to help moderate the second half. And thank you so much, Evguenia. I think in the interest of time, let's move on and ask questions in the chat, and then we'll get back to them at the very end. So our next paper is by Hannah Atkinson from the Western Arctic National Parklands, and she'll be talking about Qatŋut, celebrating the legacy of trade, dance, and connections at Sisolek. So I'm looking forward to hearing more about these connections that Evguenia started talking about. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Sorry, I'm looking. Okay, found the sharing PowerPoint. I'm Hannah Atkinson. I'm the cultural anthropologist for Western Arctic National Parklands, and I live in Kotzebue. I've lived here since I was 14 and moved away for school and came back and have been working for the National Park Service ever since. So I grew up with some knowledge of Qatŋut, and I was so happy to be able to study it through work and participate in holding the event as well, and just keeping it going. So Qatŋut is the trade fair. It is a celebration of trade and dance and connection that goes back to the trade fair that was held at Sisolek. In its roots are in that trade fair held at Sisolek. And so to introduce it, I also know that my co-author Kaylee Butler is on as well, and if anyone else that I co-authored with or from the Qatŋut Planning Committee is on the call, please say hi. You can get on video if you'd like. And I was really interested in sharing about this paper through this session that Evguenia put together because of the opportunity to connect with other people that contributed Beringian research to the Alaska Park Science article or issue that we were writing for. And so I just have a little overview to share of some of the findings of our research and the paper that we wrote. And then it's also very flexible for stories or any connections that people have to it. The presentation that you just gave, Evguenia, about that item that must have been traded was amazing. Good connection. So as an introduction, this research was supported by the Ocean and Science Learning Center and Maya Lukin as the superintendent of Western Arctic National Parklands. Maya Lukin is Inupiaq and grew up in Cape Krusenstern National Monument at Sisolak. So just a really strong connection to Sisolak and the trade fair that happened there, and has played a big role in the revitalization of the event in her in the last 20 years. So our participation in it in 2019 was collaborating with local partners to host it. And then also we had a Student Conservation Association intern to do an oral history project. And when we started out the oral history project, I'm not presenting my slides, I can try it, but I was having trouble with transitions yesterday. Yeah, I'll just, I'm gonna have to stop sharing for a little bit. I don't know why my computer's having trouble with transitioning in slideshow mode. When we started our looking into the oral history, you know, there's significant documentation from Ernest Birch of the event as it took place at Sisolak prior to the events of European contact and colonization that changed everything in Alaska. So prior, you know, in the 1800s, early 1800s, 1700s, taking place at Sisolak, there's a lot of documentation of what the event looked like and the trade and the celebration connections that were happening. But you won't find much when you Google Qatŋut. You won't find much when you Google Sisolak, but there's 3 different ways to spell Sisolak, so that doesn't help. And when you talk to the people that were organizing it, or the people in Kotzebue as this community is like hosting it, there's a lot of just oral history and pieces that have been documented over time. I have on this slide one of the pieces that was documented, I think, by Manilik in the 90s from Suya Kalina Sowers, and a really special elder who shared a lot of her knowledge from her remembering of what Qatŋut was like in the early days. So it's kind of like where we were starting out. And so questions that we started out with and kind of guided our questions that we were asking interviewees was what are the origins of Qatŋut? What changes happened through the colonial period when European contact began, and then as villages were being established around churches and Christianization was happening. And then Qatŋut through the mid 1950s, what happened in that time period, there was a lot of significant social change going on. Right away, we knew that revitalization, the movement that cultural revitalization that was happening in the 70s, 80s, and 90s was a big part of the timeline. So we had some questions about that. And then all of our questions through the interviewing, it all led to just like this shift away from a linear timeline of like, this is when it started, this is when it happened. And so our organization of the paper in Alaska Park Science, talking about this topic, focuses on just the continuation of the themes throughout history. And the things that remain the same about Qatŋut are that it is a time for trade and dance and connection. So just to share some of the, well, first I'll say that, so the main focus in 2019 were oral history interviews, and there were 7 oral history interviews done by our intern, Elisa Chen. They did a great job with the interviews, and it was mostly focused on the participants and the organizers that were in Kotzebue. So we didn't have the funding to go beyond kind of like the local context of like that event as it was happening in 2019. But in terms of trade, what stands out in our interviews and our research that we did, was just like how interested people participating in Qatŋut today are in trade. I think that dance, it's the dance celebration aspect of the event kind of like rises to the top, as is like this time where dance groups come from other villages to Kotzebue to do performances, but there's also opportunity for trade and sharing crafts, selling crafts, and all the interviewees were just talking about their interest in the event as a trade fair and utilizing that time to trade between different different village people that they know in villages or family members in villages that are visiting. And then there's a story told by Willie Goodwin. Willie Goodwin has been involved in the modern Qatŋut event for a long time, and he often does the introduction of the event. And he has shared this story about a trade between someone who lives on the Kobuk River and someone who lived on Diomede Island. This is a story that he heard growing up. And Diomede Island having no trees and the Kobuk River having lots of trees. The person from Diomede Island had a special request to trade tree gum. And once they received the tree gum from their trading partner on the Kobuk River, they said, take anything you want from my boat. And there were like seal pokes full of oil that were like really valuable. So Willie's telling of that story has always stood out to me as I attended Qatŋut the couple times I did while living here. And so we're happy through these interviews that we did that we got an interview with Willie and got that story documented, because I think it's such an amazing example of the trade partnerships that were happening throughout the history of Qatŋut. So moving on, I wanted to show a lot more like dance photos and videos, but I didn't get time to put that together. But this is one of the amazing photos that Alicia Chen took. And I think that as we were writing the paper and looking into the oral history, what we got from our interviews and then also the background materials, what was standing out is that about dance is that the revitalization of dance, well, like the impacts that colonization had on traditional practices such as dance, and then you know, from missionaries going to these celebratory events where people were dancing and singing with one another, and this sense of shame and like the ban on those types of activities that was happening, that the revitalization of Qatŋut and the revitalization of dance really mirror one another, and that going through the 1900s, people today will say like, well, dance was banned, like my parents weren't allowed to do it, like it didn't happen. And they would say the same thing about Qatŋut, but asking like more questions about it, it really sounds like it continued through the 1900s, despite that pressure from the missionaries and the people that were a part of the church community, that that persisted through the 1900s, but dance and the event Qatŋut and this gathering that was happening in Kotzebue, it had moved from Sisolok to Kotzebue, that it continued through the 1900s as well. And then the third thing that remains the same and has been continued all this time is just the travel and the international relations and connections between different communities. And it's such an important part of the heritage to share and celebrate, because it speaks back to these false narratives of the Arctic being isolated, and the just it's showing like how connected people were, how far they traveled. And so I have a lot of interest in future research into documenting more trade routes. This is a pretty simple illustration map that's based on the Birch descriptions of the trade routes that people were following in order to get to Sisolok, which is one of the major trade locations in the Arctic. So Let me see. Oh, and another thing I wanted to bring up is we connected our 2019 interviews to this body of knowledge that included archaeological research and oral history and ethnohistoric documentation. And one of the most amazing things I found, it was like later in our research that we found the film series that was funded by the Shared Beringian Heritage Program from 1996. And I feel like it's lost on YouTube because it doesn't show up when you put Qatŋut into it, or it might if you do some digging, but it has the Inupiaq title, Qatŋut, and making it a little bit more challenging to find, but there's a part 1, 2, and 3 that had a lot of interviews from elders in the 90s describing their memories of Qatŋut. So like kind of all together, this body of oral history is growing, and the documented oral history. And I hope that we can just focus on making things accessible to people so that they can carry on those conversations about the heritage of the event as the event is continuing to happen. It did not happen in 2021 due to COVID-19, but it happens every other year in Kotzebue. And I would love to see more oral history documentation, especially if there are attendees from like a dance group from Wayland attended in 2013. So if that type of thing is possible, again, like the type of documentation that could happen from attendees that are from other communities, I think would be really amazing. And yeah, I kind of lost track of time. Well, I have 5 minutes. So just any questions that people have or any like stories or connections. I maybe should have provided more background information for people who are not as familiar with the event, but if you read the article that is in Alaska Park Science, the Shared Beringian Heritage Program issue, special issue, then that gives you a lot of background. So I hope that people will read that. And my final slide, I think that the main finding of the article is that in celebrating the heritage of Qatŋut, it's not really about when it started or the direct timeline of how things happened, but it's amazing that every generation of Kotzebue Sound Inupiat, from the oral history record and then from talking to people today, everyone remembers Qatŋut taking place, and that's going back thousands and thousands of years. So, and many visions of it in the future.
Hannah, if I can just jump in here with a question.
Yeah.
That was, yeah, really, really interesting. And I wonder, I'm forgetting the name now of the dance celebration that takes place every other year up in Yaglovsk, but are there connections between, yeah, Kivik, thank you. Are there connections between Qatŋut and Kivik?
Yeah, I think for sure when we were, so one of the interesting parts of our 2019 interviews was how often people would bring up other dance celebrations, and you know, and I was working with Alicia Chen. It was their first experience like in this region with this culture, and you know, talking to them about the background of like messenger feasts and just kind of like, I think that like the traditional origins of like these celebrations that people have or had in traditional Inupiaq culture, it was very different than what it was today. You know, I haven't studied Kivik much, but I believe it's a messenger feast. And so that origin is different than the Sisolik trade fair. It was a summer event. It was about trade, and the messenger feasts were like winter events. that were more, it was just like a different reason to celebrate. And so I think looking at those traditional reasons that those celebrations came about, and then the way that they're celebrated today, they're very much connected, because and people were even bringing up like the ICC celebration in that was hosted in Kotzebue sometime in the 90s, I believe, or in the early 2000s, before my family moved here. People were bringing up that ICC celebration and comparing it to Qatŋut, and I was so interested in that. I mean, there's obvious like parallels with like the international relations and bringing people together and how you feel when you're celebrating. But the origins of ICC celebrations are very different, or maybe not that different than like the trade fair that was happening at Sisolak. So yeah, the way that people remember and like conceptualize like the heritage of an event, I think was something that is more what this paper was looking at than like what are the true origins. It's just like how do people that are organizing it today talk about the heritage.
Great, thank you. Maybe we should jump into the next paper, which is one I'm participating in. So essentially, I'm Amber Lincoln, affiliated researcher with the University of Alaska Fairbanks, and Patrick Plate, who's a professor at UAF, is going to share his screen, and we, the three of us with graduate student Varpu Lotvonen, will also talk through our paper here. So great. I guess, so I will just say slide, Patrick, when I'm ready. But thank you all for coming, and special thanks to Evguenia for her work on the session, and also for her work with the Shared Beringian Heritage Program. So this project that the three of us have been working on is funded by the Shared Beringian Heritage Program, and we've been engaging with this project, which really is trying to generate a visual history and like, you know, creating the visual histories and legacies of Alaska reindeer herding. So as many of you know, reindeer herding was introduced in Alaska as part of a US government program that relied first on Chukchi reindeer and reindeer herders. This was followed by bringing Sami herders from Norway, who then stayed in the region and continued to teach reindeer herding to Alaska Native herders. So there's been quite a bit written about this history. This basically started at the turn of the 20th century. Because it was a government program, there's kind of large written archival information about it. And essentially, we've been trying to kind of align or create a correspondence between that written material and visual materials. So this initially started with a collection from the Smithsonian, the National Museum of the American Indian, where we identified a collection taken by a special agent for the Department of Interior, Frank Churchill, who was basically sent up to Alaska to sort of, you know, investigate the early reindeer program and education in Alaska. So he was really kind of on a quote unquote fact-finding mission. And he took several photographs, and he and his wife accumulated several photographs that they took, but also others that were taken by William Lopp, who at the time was superintendent of government schools and reindeer for the Northern District of Alaska. So this was around 1905 when Churchill went up there. He continued to receive photographs from Lopp, who lived many years in Alaska throughout the years. And we started with this collection, photographic collection, which really sort of, I guess, paved the way for or led us to other visual material. And so in the next section, Varpu is going to really talk about the positioning of this visual material and how we might understand and how we might interpret the images as we see them in order to sort of help understand this history further by looking at who's taking the photographs and when they were taken and the context in which those photographs were taken. So I think next slide, and Varpu.
Yes, thank you, Amber. So yeah, these photo collections were, they seem to us to be personal collections. These photos were kind of taken as a byproduct of Frank and Clara Churchill's travels, and they were not part of the official report. And like Amber said, it's kind of cross-pollinated with other photo collections. And this highlights some really fundamental questions about the positionality of the photographer and the effects that this positionality has on the photos themselves. And specifically, I will contrast Churchill albums to those two photos taken by William T. Lopp and probably his family.
Enjoying the
And then I'll show some kind of truly insider portrayal of reindeer work by an Alaska Native artist. So I hope to show that the relations between the photographer and the photographed are kind of irrevocably visible in the pictures. In this photo, for instance, you can see Frank Churchill behind these Kivalina reindeer herding families, kind of standing apart from them. And yeah, the herders to me look kind of unamused and a little bit distant. Next slide, please. And here's some other photographs that were taken by Churchill's that I think are pretty representative of the collection. So you can see unnamed indigenous people and kind of reindeer at distance. And these pictures probably just served as personal mementos of all of the things that the Churchills saw and experienced in Alaska. Unfortunately for us, they were clearly not interested in the particulars of what they saw, such as names of people or oftentimes exact locations. But the collection also contained an entire album of photographs from William T. Lopp family. And that pointed us towards more research with Lopp photos too. And positionalities of Frank Churchill and William Lopp could like hardly be more different in terms of their familiarity and intimacy with the people and processes that are depicted in the photos. So Churchill's only briefly visited Alaska over the summer cruise, but the Lopp family had a long-standing involvement with the coastal Inupiat and reindeer herding as well. And William Lopp started as a teacher and missionary in Wales in 1890 and was involved with Alaska for decades. And he is remembered as a person who spoke Inupiaq language and ate Inupiaq food. And he was seems like he was in really friendly relations with many of his Alaska Native friends. And maybe as a reflection of this, many more people are named on verso of the photographs in Lopp collection. And I think that what matters gets recorded, and people seem to matter to the Lopps more than they did for Churchill's. Next slide, please. Here's one of the really great photos from Lopp collection. Others include just herders, reindeer, sledding, especially seem to be interesting, corral building, and other facets of life. And these photos were maybe sent to the Churchills to augment their understanding of reindeer herding in Alaska. a version of this beautiful family portrait was featured in the Churchill collection with the name Eskimo Herder and Family. And I think the shadow of the photographer is Lop himself. And although names of these people did not get recorded anywhere, and neither did the location of their camp, I assume that these were very likely people that Lop knew well. All right, next slide, please. And here's a spread from the album Lop sent to Churchill's to show kind of like more situations that Lop had access to. Here we see more reindeer, and the person on the right-hand corner, Johnny Ortursky, is mentioned by name. But even with this expansive and ever-expanding collection of photographs that depict the early day reindeer herding, pictures of the kind of like the daily work and grind of reindeer life are kind of rare. Next, please. And luckily, unnamed Inupiaq artists fill some gaps in the visual record. They're like this lively drawing, for instance, depicts lassoing reindeer, and they other artworks also show scenes that were maybe just inaccessible for photographers. And these drawings display this kind of intimate familiarity with the visual aspects of work with reindeer, and photos do not offer us that. In Churchill's case, that was probably because of his positionality as an outsider who, only visited for summer anyway. And in Lop's case, he was familiar with the people and the activities. So maybe in his case, the absence of action shots was caused by this incredibly bulky photography equipment, or maybe his personal interest as a photographer. So I'll just briefly conclude my portion. The visual representations, photos and drawings vary in their ability to depict people, animals, and processes with intimacy and action. Thank you.
Great, I'll pick back up, and maybe we can go to the next slide here. So the priority of the project, or one priority, is to sort of generate this visual history and sort of, and I think we found that these photographs and these drawings sort of bring up questions that we might not have thought about before. We knew from the written record that the Sami from Norway brought reindeer dogs, but we had never, I think these animals are sort of lost to the genetic record of sort of Alaska mutts or of some way. But here you actually see a photo of a working dog, and you can almost, I might be extrapolating a little bit too much, but you can almost see this dog just working, there's a reindeer on the right side of the photo that's almost kind of got a look at looking at the dog. So kind of raises these really interesting questions of how this work was actually done. Likewise, the photo of the reindeer meat, we know that there was a sizable reindeer meat industry in Nome, particularly during the gold rush, but never, we never really had a sort of description of how that was sold and how that meat was processed. And, and this helps us raise these questions. And by seeing, clearly this animal is being butchered. And I don't know, it's a classic, the photographer is unknown in this photo, I'm sure. Some of you in Nome can probably identify the photographer, but this was kind of a popular postcard. So this information, this visual information, helps us think a little bit more about these questions. Patrick, I think you're going to take the next slide.
Yes, thank you, Amber. Here. So yeah, one of the ways in which we try to answer these kinds of questions, the questions that were raised by Amber, was to look for correspondences, to look for correspondences between Churchill's photo collection and Churchill's written report, which was published in 1906. As Varpu mentioned earlier in the presentation, the photos were not part of the report that Churchill submitted to the government. However, it contains useful information that adds context to the visual documentation of Alaskan reindeer stations in the early 20th century. In the report, we learn about key individuals and groups who were involved in reindeer herding, as well as the number of reindeer they each owned. And here you can see the key actors and owners for the Teller reindeer station. This information comes from the report that Churchill wrote. So I put back there the photo with the working dog just to say that we don't know for sure to whom the working dog belonged, but the report does mention the presence of a Sami expert reindeer herder in Teller. And when considered together, Churchill's textual and photographic documentation provide a better basis for potentially reconnecting places, people, and animals, especially dogs and reindeer. Another important document that we used and rely on to gain insight into Churchill's photo collection is the logbook of the USS Bear, the revenue cutter on which Frank and Clara Churchill traveled in the summer of 1905. The captain of the Bear, O.C. Hamlet, wrote detailed notes about daily activities on board. For July 2021, for example, we learned that an individual named Sepila came back on board, and you have the quote here on the upper right corner of this slide. So we learned that an individual named Sepila came back on board, and that Sepila was a native reindeer herder from St. Lawrence Island. This information, again, adds context and depth to Churchill's photo collection, where a reindeer herder named Supila, most likely the same individual, is pictured, but with no further information regarding his identity or place of origin. So again, finding correspondences between Churchill's photographic documentation and related written documentations, Churchill's own report, but also the logbook of the Bear, proved to be a useful and quite efficient method for connecting places and peoples in the complex picture of reindeer herding in the early 20th century, in early 20th century Alaska.
Okay, and part of that, this sort of visualizing and understanding this history is, one area that's, reindeer herding in Alaska has been this multicultural influence. You have influences from Chukotka and then of course the Sami. You have Inupiaq herders. You have and then Yupik herders started later, and then herding spread all the way down to the Alaska Peninsula. And so, what does this multicultural history look like? And I think the illustrations and the photos provide a really interesting perspective on this. So on the left-hand side, you have this drawing by, again, an unknown Inupiaq artist who has drawn a Chukchi sled, and then followed by a classic sort of Inupiaq sled. And then later on, or below that, there's a separate drawing of reindeer with what they call a hauling boat, but is more likely a Sami sled, as sort of shown in the picture on the right of Nick Medagoruk from Pilot Point. So I think, and these things provide, topics to sort of further explore. But again, the reindeer harness equipment and how that was used, the lower photo on the right, again, shows an Inupiaq sled with the classic Sami reindeer harness. So yeah, this is really interesting. I'm gonna cut it short and just say that, you know, this sort of bringing together this different material is really what I guess we're kind of calling co-curation, and trying to make this accessible to descendant herders, people who descend from reindeer herders, both in Alaska and Sami herders, as well as in Chukotka. So it has been sort of a process of, you know, finding connections between the written and the visual material. So thank you very much, and I will leave it at that. And I think we better, in the interest of time, just skip questions. But of course, Patrick, Varpu, and I are always happy to take questions later. But it's almost 5 o'clock. If I hope many of you don't mind staying over a few minutes. That's a pretty classic conference move, but at least it's not Friday. So why don't I go ahead and introduce Natalia Tatarenkova from the State Natural Biosphere Reserve, and she will be talking about the systematic approach to place stand research in the Commander Islands. So thank you very much.
Good day. One moment. Do you see my presentation?
Yes, looks great.
Окей. Женя, я тогда буду пофразово просить перевести, да?
I'm
Ryan,
here
what's more
to help translate, Natalia. Apologies in advance. I know there are others here who are probably more qualified than I am, but giving people a break. So yeah, go ahead, Natalia. I'll do the best I can.
Спасибо.
Thank you.
В прошлом году вышла моя книга «Топонимы Командорских островов», и я хотела рассказать о 20-летнем опыте сбора и обработки информации для этой книги.
So last year, her book on the systematic approach to place name research on Commander Islands came out, and she wanted to discuss some of the making of this book.
Командорские острова визуально являются продолжением Алеутской дуги, но в геологическом отношении это самостоятельный архипелаг.
So the Commander Islands appear to be an extension of the Aleutian Islands, but from a geological perspective, they're separate.
Жителям Камчатки было издавна известно о некой суше, лежащей напротив Кранотского мыса, и опубликована одна статья о предметах неолитической стоянки на острове, но культурные слои не были обнаружены.
So she's discussing the connection between people in Kamchatka and in the Commander Islands. Say it one more time, Natalia. What is the connection? Какое отношение между этими народами?
Жители Камчатки наблюдали за миграцией морских котиков и сделали вывод о том, что восточнее Камчатского мыса лежит суша. Они могли попасть на эти острова.
Yeah, they understood that they could voyage out to the Commander Islands from Kamchatka.
Но тем не менее эти острова были необитаемы. И поскольку у нас много археологов сегодня выступало, я сразу скажу, что культурный слой, то есть места стоянок, обнаружены не были, хотя их искали.
Okay, so but the islands were not inhabited, as archaeologists have discovered. And she's going to discuss some of the archaeological research that was done there.
Таким образом, официальное открытие произошло в 1741 году морским отрядом Витуса Беринга.
So the official discovery took place in 1741, the oceanic expedition of Vitus Bering.
Соответственно, официальная топонимика и гидронимика имеют начало именно с этого года.
So the beginning of the study of the ocean, the land began this year.
Сохранился сохранилось два топонима с 1742 года. Это мыс Манати, самая южная точка. Манати значит морская корова.
So yeah, one of the first official names is Cape Manatee, which of course is a name for a sea cow, given in 1741.
Другой топоним Усы очень сложно сегодня интерпретировать.
Okay, another name, Usi, is very difficult to interpret today.
Потому что это не мужские усы, это может быть китовый ус или детали такелажа.
Yeah, perhaps it refers to whale baleen, right, Usi, or yeah, but it's quite unclear.
И еще благодаря второй Камчатской экспедиции сохранилось слово «лайда». Это архангельское слово, обозначающее прибрежную полосу. Везде оно вымерло по территории России, и только на командорах осталось.
So the name Ladakh, no, Ladu?
Лайда.
Is also associated, has come down to us as associated with the Commander Islands, but it's a word that comes from Arkhangelsk, and I think you said only maintained there and in the Commander Islands.
Помимо экспедиции Беринга в XVIII веке большой след оставили русские промышленники и первые казаки, которые занимались промыслами на островах.
Yeah, after them came a number of промышленники, so fur traders who followed in the wake of Bering.
В книге сделан подробный анализ, кто в каком году, в каком составе и с какой целью в XVIII веке заходил на острова.
So in the book, it's explained who, in which year, where in the 18th century people were on the Commander Islands through the archaeological research.
В частности, удалось установить, что селение Никольское имеет свое начало не в 1826 году, а в 1745.
So it was possible to establish that the inhabitants of Nikolskaya did not originate in, did not catch the year.
1826 считалось, а на самом деле 1745.
1745, actually, from 1745.
То есть был проведен подробный этот анализ, я не буду вдаваться в детали, потому что это огромный исторический пласт.
She's not going to go into all the details of the archaeological research that just determined this, because it's a really big topic.
Неожиданным побочным продуктом исследования стало установление точной даты и точной группы, которая упоминается в связи с официальной датой вымирания морской коровы.
So one thing was possible to do is establish exactly, who was involved in what year with the killing and extermination of the sea cow.
Обычно все исследователи ссылаются на публикацию Байера, а он, в свою очередь, ссылался на экспедицию Левашова и Креницына.
Most people rely on the account of, I'm sorry, who was it again? I wrote about this, I should remember.
Обычно Байер это германоязычная публикация, откуда мы берем 1768 год, вымирания коровы, потому что публикаций и таких отчетов Левашова ну, там нет подробной информации.
So Bayer, who most people rely on, told us that the sea cow was exterminated in 1768, information which he got from the Levashov-Krynitsyn expedition.
На самом деле удалось выяснить, когда и в каком месяце, и чья группа, это была группа морехода Софьина, что именно эта группа забила ту самую морскую корову.
But they were actually able to determine which people it was exactly which month when the last sea cow was killed. It's very interesting.
Но на самом деле сохранились и более поздние свидетельства. Начала 70-х годов, они сохранились в семейных историях командорских алеутов.
So in fact, there are eyewitness accounts from the 1800s.
1770-е годы, то есть спустя несколько лет после официальной даты вымирания, еще это животное встречалось, и это сохранилось в семейных рассказах, зафиксированных в архивных документах. Это нигде не было опубликовано.
Yeah, archival documents show that it was actually later than the 1768 date that the sea cow is still mentioned by eyewitnesses.
Более поздний период российско-американской кампании, нескольким мысам были даны официальные названия мыс Юшин, мыс Вакселя и мыс Хитрова. Они все посвящены морским офицерам второй Камчатской экспедиции.
During the period of the Russian-American company, several new toponyms were given: Cape Vaxel, Cape Yushin, Cape Hitrov. These were all in memory of important discoverers of the Commander Islands.
Но когда я восстановила схему передвижения отрядов второй Камчатской экспедиции по территории острова, оказалось, что имена никак не связаны с их прототипами, то есть теми людьми, в чью честь они названы.
Yeah, these toponyms were not necessarily entirely accurate. They didn't correspond to the actual presence of some of these people in those places.
К примеру, к мысу Вакселя, вот этот мыс Вакселя, ходил Юшин.
So, for example, at Cape Vaxel, it was actually Yushin who was there, not Vaxel.
А к мысу Юшина ходил вообще Иванов.
And it was Ivanov who discovered Cape Yushin.
То есть эти названия были даны как дань уважения, но никакой исторической привязки не существовало.
Yeah.
Ну, кроме того, что экспедиция зимовала на острове.
So there's really no tight historical connection between the names and people who were there, except for the fact that they were somewhere on the islands.
Далее я скажу несколько слов о 3 столпах Командорских островов, которые посвятили серьезные работы островам это конец XIX века.
So she's going to just have a short discussion of 3 pillars of Commander Islands history from the late 19th century.
Эти господа дискутировали между собой, и благодаря этому, благодаря детальному изучению всех их публикаций и всех их дискуссий, удалось сделать картину объемной. Я сейчас объясню свою мысль. Да, каждый человек высказывает свое субъективное восприятие. Когда люди между собой спорят, то получается объективная картина, и на командорах, к счастью, вот эта информация сохранилась.
People have all sorts of different ideas. She, combining them to take some come to some kind of objective information about these 3 men, I think, in their relationship to the Commander Islands.
Николай Гребницкий на протяжении 30 лет был управляющим островами,
Это человек, который знал все обо всем, имел университетское образование, и его сборы находятся, коллекционные сборы в очень многих музеях мира.
So Gorobnitsky was the governor of the Commander Islands. He was a man with wide knowledge. Lots of his collections have ended up in different museums.
В частности, все старые сборы костей морской коровы так или иначе курировал он. В том числе в музее Вены.
Sorry, Natalia, break up a little bit for me, but so he's responsible, I believe, for some of the skeletons, the intact skeletons we have of the sea cow, including the one in Vienna.
Он свободно владел алеутским языком, и его старшая дочь была алеутка.
He knew the Aleutian language very well. His oldest daughter was part Aleut.
Второй человек – это Леонард Стейнегер, американский зоолог. Я думаю, что он многим известен. Он посвятил командорам целую серию публикаций, и благодаря его усилиям другие специалисты американские изучали командоры и зоологические, ботанические сборы.
I think Leonard Steinegger will be well known to many people. He was an American zoologist. He dedicated a whole number of books to the Commander Islands and awoken interest amongst Americans in the islands.
И он сам привнес в топонимику несколько слов, несколько названий, посвященных Стеллеру.
So he was responsible for a few places being named after Steller.
Он был большим поклонником Стеллера, и, обходя остров на шлюпке, он пытался увидеть все глазами Стеллера.
So he was a great fan of Steller. He tried to see the islands through Steller's eyes.
Таким образом, самую высокую сопку он назвал гора Стеллера, в то время как она уже имела алеутское название Чунугулах, что значит «нечистая сила».
So he tried to have the highest peak in the commanders named after Steller, which already had an Aleut name, which meant unclean. I didn't catch the last word. Maybe someone can help me.
Чунугулах.
I don't know it.
Вот.
Evil spirits on the slide.
Sorry?
Evil spirits.
Oh, evil spirits. Thank you.
Значит, по топонимике он давал немецкую транскрипцию. То есть в данном случае часть текстов написана на немецком, часть на английском, соответственно, транскрипции отличаются.
So some of his works were done in German, some in English.
И третий человек – это польский исследователь, который был уездным врачом, окружным врачом Петропавловска, это Бенедикт Дыбовский.
The last person is Benedict Dybowski, who was a doctor in Petropavlovsk.
Этот человек впервые посвятил топонимам островов отдельную главу в своей книге.
So he gave in his book several new toponyms, or devoted several chapters of his book to toponyms.
Он очень хорошо слышал нюансы языка и очень четко передал фонетику алеутских слов.
He knew the Aleut language very well and developed a dictionary of Aleut words.
Другой польский исследователь, который работал на командорах, это Юзеф Морозевич. Он геолог.
The geologist Josef Morozevich was the second Polish, important Polish personage in the history of the toponyms of the Commander Islands.
Его передача названий фонетического звучания гораздо хуже, чем у Дыбовского. но тем не менее алеутские слова можно узнать.
So his rendition of Aleut words was quite a bit worse than the other Dubovsky, but it is possible to sort of figure out what he was trying to say.
Впоследствии часть названий были замещены на русские аналоги.
So he used Russian analogs.
Нет, он использовал алеутские, а после уже, то есть на этой карте еще алеутские слова, а на более поздних стоят русские.
Okay, so later the Aleut place names would be replaced by Russian place names on the maps. I think that's correct.
К примеру, вот здесь я показываю небольшую бухту на юге, которая называлась Ханна-Эта. По-алеутски это Ханимуза. А сейчас там стоит русское название бухта Озерная, озеро, lake. Все это синонимы. Ханна-Уза и бухта Озерная.
Hana-Uza was the Aleut name that's indicated there. Now it's called Lake, what do you call it? Indentation, Bucht, which is the Russian analog for the, I mean, it means the same thing as the Aleut word did. It's a Russian translation, essentially, of that Aleut term.
И благодаря полякам, благодаря Дыбовскому и Морозевичу сохранилась легенда, которая, ну, всего лишь легенда, она не соответствует действительности. Бухта около села Никольского, они назвали ее бухтой Святого Мавриция в честь графа Беневского.
Okay, so it's thanks to these Polish geologists that we have the several Aleut legends, not actual happenings, have been preserved in the toponyms, right?
Вообще Беневский никогда не был на командорах, то есть его рассказ неправильно интерпретировали, он говорил о Курилах. Но тем не менее вот на вот этой карте оно сохранилось, бухта Святого Мауриция, и мы это рассказываем как исторический анекдот.
Okay, I think I got that. So Dubovsky was not in the Commander Islands, actually. Though he
Нет,
wrote
Беневский.
Benyovsky was not there. He wrote about them, but it's thanks to this name Святой какой?
Мауриций.
Mauritsky. It has been preserved.
Я просто обращаю внимание, что иногда топонимы возникают, но в этом нет никакого смысла и никакой логики. В данном случае хотя бы была предыстория, и мы понимаем, откуда оно взялось. Но позже были случаи, когда названия давались просто спонтанно.
So in many cases, there are toponyms that don't really have any kind of relationship to real life whatsoever. And then the second part?
Названия давались спонтанно, то есть я хочу сказать, что не всегда следует искать логику, иногда ее просто нет.
Yeah, some of them just arose spontaneously. There's no reason to try to really try to figure out the sensical origins to some of these toponyms.
И последнее – это объекты, которые названы в честь людей, либо тех, которые оставили яркий след, таких как Эмиль Крепс.
Okay, and the last category are those named after people who left some kind of significant mark on the commander, such as Emil Krebs.
Или же в честь алеутов, которые промышляли в той или иной бухте.
Or in commemorating Aleuts who hunted in one or another inlets.
Для того, чтобы восстановить, в честь кого именно из алеутов были названы географические объекты, были построены полные генеалогические древа для каждой семьи, для всех семей.
So they put together they were able, with the help of this, to put together entire genealogies for Aleut families. Necessary to reconstruct the complete genealogical tree, to find who this bay was named after. Okay, I see.
Да, то есть каждая бухта требовала отдельного исследования, и каждый раз это была отдельная история и сопоставление большого количества источников.
Yeah, piecing together all sorts of different sources, they were able to, figure out who the names of these bays, which Aleuts they were associated with.
На этом я хочу вас поблагодарить как переводчика и поблагодарить слушателей и извиниться, что мой рассказ был на русском языке. Это мой первый опыт такой конференции.
Natalia Tatarenkova, thanks everyone for their attention. It's forgiveness that she was speaking in Russian, her first experience with this kind of conference. Thank you, Natalia.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Natalia, and thank you for translating. I know, I'm sure some of you need to leave, and that would be just fine. Yes, Ryan Jones, thank you so much for translating that. But if anybody would like to stay and ask questions, and maybe even we can bring in any questions for Jenya as well. I'm gonna let it be silent. Victor, please.
Да, у меня вопрос вот к Наталье. Да, вот вы сказали про слово лайда, да, вот в контексте топонимики. Ну, даже не вопрос, я как бы навожу, что вот в районе Нижней Индигирки там есть компактное проживание русских арктических старожилов 17 века. Это село Русское Устье называется. И там просто масса вот таких вот топонимов с слова лайда, различные лайды.
Это слово было распространено по всей Сибири.
Can I interrupt? Можно я вас прерву немножко, потому что я хочу перевести всем остальным. I feel like we moved into that beautiful moment where we can have question discussion in Russian, but I'd like to make sure that everybody is involved in it. So Victor had kind of an addition to Natalia's research. He mentioned that it's really interesting that Natalia mentioned the word Laida, because there is a place at the mouth of Indigirka River which had a very heavy involvement of Pamor people from Arkhangelsk. And there are a lot of place names with that specific terminology, and it's not its own language, but it has its own vocabulary for sure. So, and he mentioned that there is actually a place name with Laida in it. And Natalia is going to comment too. Dash.
Да, это слово было распространено по всей Сибири, и я ожидаю, что оно где-то очагово сохранилось. Но самое интересное, что на командорах это обычное слово, которое сейчас в повседневном языке используется, а на Камчатке его никто не знает, вообще никто.
So she's saying that it kind of makes sense that this word would show up in place names along the Arctic coast, and it probably will. She'll probably see the evidence of that. But what's really interesting is that in her experience of living both in Commander Islands and in Kamchatka, this is a pretty normal everyday term in Commander Islands. Everybody knows it, and in Kamchatka nobody has heard about this. So it's a little a big divide between terminology.
I have a question, and it's a little off topic, and I apologize, but I've always been fascinated with the sea cow, and I wondered if anyone has any experience with knowing if there's any indigenous material culture made with stellar sea cow, and if Natalia, if you came across any Aleut language terms associated with sea cow.
Женя, переведите, пожалуйста.
Вопрос был, Эмбли очень заинтересовала информация о последнем моменте морской коровы, и ей всегда было интересно, как традиционно использовать материалы, связанные вот как бы с животным, то есть кости, кожа. Есть ли у вас какая-то информация на эту тему? У меня, кстати,
Более того, есть публикации мои на эту тему. Ну, во-первых, в этой книге, значит, вот она где-то, вот она, вот так видно, да?
Надо подальше, чуть-чуть подальше, когда близко к камеру. А теперь поближе. We're trying to get it in focus.
Ладно. В этой книге подробно описана история, связанная с истреблением морской коровы, то есть вот детально. И есть две мои публикации. Одна из них – это анализ динамика посещения Командорских островов в период истребления морской коровы, как именно ее добывали и для каких целей.
Значит, я перебью.
Да.
So part of this book deals with that, and there is a description of where the sea cow was hunted and how that was taken care of and what happened next.
В другой статье описано, значит, как охотились, но дело в том, что использовалось у нее, очень ценилось не только мясо, но и шкура, потому что это была готовая обтяжка для байдары. То есть, когда шли на восток, на Камчатке брали каркас, то есть заготавливали каркас байдары, а на месте уже обтягивали шкурой коровы, то есть на Алеутских уже островах, не на Командорах. И таким образом была легкая и великолепная лодка получалась.
So one of your sources indicates that the stellar sea cow skin was used in fabrication of skin boats, and the kind of a standard way of doing that would be to build the frame of the boat in Kamchatka and then bring it with you. And I'm assuming that you could even bring it unlashed. It doesn't have to be in one place. You could reconnect it, or you can bring as one piece, and then cover it with the skin in the Aleutian Islands.
Сами ребра морской коровы уже после ее вымирания алеуты использовали для того, чтобы упрочить собачьи нарты. Они делали нартовые подполоски из ребра морской коровы. И вообще много изделий делали из ребра морской коровы.
Sea cow ribs were used to make the runners for the sleds, and the the bones were actually used quite a bit in different construction. There is an artifact in the Museum of the Aleutians, which is made out of stellar sea cow. And I'm trying to think what it is. I think it's a stuff, and as it often happens, it has a label attached to it. It's a shaman stuff, but that's like we're not sure why, where that connection, where connection with shamans happen. There isn't in that I know, because I worked in the Aleutian Islands. There was no oral history which would back it out, so we didn't know where it came from. Наташа говорит, что вот на Aleutских островах в музее есть посох, который сделан из кости.
Да, вообще есть публикации, но, правда, они на русском, но их легко можно перевести сейчас. Есть
Kunstkamera тоже. So, like, Natalia says there are publications, and they're in Russian. So again, reason to translate more and communicate. One of the things which I've been thinking about ever since I read Natalia's book is that that's a prime candidate for maybe Beringia translation in the future, and I'm sure that will kind of reignite a lot of kind kind of connections in how the places are named and what's the pattern, how it happens. I think what's really interesting for me is that, you know, in Natalia's research, in the case of Commander Islands, the time frame of naming the places in Unangan language is so much shorter than the Aleutian Islands. And it's kind of an interesting set. It's a really interesting, like a set of place names and almost reachable in people's memory to connect and learn about it. It's fantastic stuff. Мне кажется, вы меня поняли, Наталья, да?
Да.
Thank you. Спасибо большое. Yes, any other questions? Maybe anything for Evguenia too? She kind of got cut short. Well, I suppose we can also take forward questions and more information through email and stuff. But again, I would like to thank all the speakers, and Evguenia, thank you so much for organizing this and for all your work. I know you've been put in sort of a complicated position here, but we're so grateful that this work continues to go forth. And you know, it's just been such a pleasure to hear from everybody. So thank you very much, and I wish you all a good conference for the rest of the week. All right.
Thank you so much, Amber. Thank you, Sam, and thank you everybody involved.
I just wanted to say thank you everyone as well. So thank you. And Amber, thanks for helping moderate.
Yeah, not a problem. And thank you for jumping in as well. So we'll see you throughout the conference, I hope.
Cool. Yeah, likewise.
Bye.
Bye.
Спасибо, пока.
Thank you for your reports, and thanks to the organizers for the conference. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you. Спасибо.
До свидания.
До свидания.
Всего доброго. До свидания.